The sound of the rain hitting the black umbrellas was the only thing filling the silence. A rhythmic drumming that felt like it was counting down the seconds of my old life. I stood there, staring at the mahogany casket that held the only person in the world who had truly loved me, unconditionally, my father. But as a final prayer was spoken and the crowd began to shuffle toward the limousines, a hand touched my shoulder. Not in comfort, but with a firm, possessive grip that made my skin crawl. I turned to see Linda, her eyes dry, hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses, her lips pressed into a thin line of calculated impatience. She didn't offer a hug. Instead, she pressed a crisp, white envelope into my hand, the paper cold against my damp palm. "Read it later," she whispered, her voice devoid of grief. "But don't get too comfortable tonight." Sarah, the funeral wasn't even over, my father wasn't even in the ground, and the woman who had made the last 5 years of his life a subtle misery was already making her move. To understand why that envelope felt heavier than a tombstone, you have to understand the house. We didn't just live in a house, we lived in the Oaks, a sprawling estate my father had built from the ground up, stone by stone, deal by deal. It sat on a hill overlooking the valley, accessible only by a winding, quarter-mile private drive lined with the ancient oak trees that gave the property its name. Growing up, that driveway was my gateway to magic. A tunnel of green leaves in the summer and a stark, beautiful skeleton in the winter. It was where I learned to ride a bike, where I waited for Dad to come home from work, and where I cried when I left for college. My father, Robert, was a brilliant architect but a man with a blind spot for affection. When my mother passed away 10 years ago, he was shattered. He filled the void with work, expanding the estate, buying the surrounding acres to ensure our privacy, creating a fortress against his own loneliness. But fortresses have gates, and eventually, someone learned the code. Enter Linda. She was 20 years his junior, a former interior designer with a taste for champagne and a shark's instinct for blood in the water. She swept into his life at a charity gala, dazzling him with compliments and feigned interest in his structural designs. I saw through it immediately. I saw the way her eyes scanned the room, pricing the furniture, assessing the net worth of everyone present. But Dad, he saw a second chance. He saw vibrancy where I saw vanity. Within 6 months, they were married. Within a year, my photos were moved from the mantel to the hallway, then to the den, and finally, to my old bedroom. The house began to change. The warm, rustic charm Dad loved was replaced by cold marble, stark white furniture that looked uncomfortable to sit on, and art pieces that cost more than my college tuition. I was 24, working as a landscape architect in the city, and every time I visited, I felt less like a daughter and more like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. "Your father needs peace, Sarah," Linda would say, blocking the door to his study. "He's working on the legacy." The legacy. That was her favorite word. She spoke of it constantly, as if she were the curator of a museum rather than a wife to a living man. But I didn't care about the money or the estate. I just wanted my dad. And as his health began to decline, a slow, agonizing erosion caused by a heart condition, I watched Linda turn from a pampering wife into a gatekeeper. The tension in the house was palpable, a physical weight that hung in the air. Linda would glide through the hallways, phone glued to her ear, discussing assets and liquidations in hushed tones, hanging up abruptly whenever I entered the room. "Just planning for the future, darling," she cooed, her smile not reaching her eyes. As Dad got weaker, she got stronger, bolder. She started firing the longtime staff, the housekeeper who had known me since I was a baby, the gardener who taught me names of flowers. She isolated him, fed him lies about me being too busy to visit, while simultaneously telling me Dad was resting and didn't want to be disturbed. I knew a storm was coming. I could smell the ozone in the air, but I assumed the storm would be a legal battle. A fight over money, a struggle for heirlooms. I didn't expect the brutality of what happened the moment his heart stopped beating. I didn't expect that the woman who promised to love him would treat his daughter like an infection to be excised. And standing there in the rain, clutching that envelope, I realized that my grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. The war had started and I was already behind enemy lines. The reception was held at the house. Linda insisted on it, calling it a celebration of life, though it felt more like a networking event for her. Caterers circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that Dad would have hated, tiny microscopic portions of things he couldn't pronounce. The house was filled with strangers, people Linda knew, not Dad's old friends. His fishing buddies, his poker crew, they were conspicuously absent. I stood in the corner of the grand living room, a ghost in my own childhood home, watching Linda hold court. She was wearing a black dress that was tastefully mournful, but cut just low enough to remind everyone she was still on the market, still vital. He used to talk about this view for hours, I heard her say to a man in a sharp suit, gesturing to the panoramic window that overlooked the valley. But honestly, the upkeep is dreadful. It's too much house for one woman. My stomach clenched. She was already planting the seeds. She hadn't even waited 24 hours. I needed air. I stepped out onto the terrace, the stone still slick from the earlier rain. The view was breathtaking, the sun trying to peek through the clouds, casting long shafts of light onto the wet asphalt of the long, winding driveway below. That driveway. It was the artery of the estate, the only connection to the outside world, Sarah. The voice was like scratching a chalkboard. I turned to see Linda standing in the French doors, a glass of wine in her hand. She stepped out, closing the door behind her, sealing us off from the noise of the party. "You haven't opened your letter," she said, nodding to the envelope I had shoved into my coat pocket. "I figured it could wait until the body was cold, Linda." I snapped, my patience fraying. She took a sip of wine, unbothered. "Practicality isn't cruel, Sarah. It's necessary. Your father didn't want you to be burdened." "Burdened with what?" "His memory. With the estate," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "He made some changes to the will a few months ago. When his mind was clear," I froze. "What changes?" She smiled, a small, tight expression of victory. "The house, the contents, the investments. They go to me. Naturally. I am his wife. I need to be supported. And me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He cut me out?" "Not entirely," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "He left you the sentimental things, and some land. The undeveloped parcels. You know, the woods. Since you like playing in the dirt with your little landscaping job." She stepped closer, the smell of expensive perfume and wine overwhelming me. "But here's the reality, Sarah. I'm listing the house Monday. I have buyers interested. Developers who want to subdivide the main lot." "You can't," I gasped. "He built this place." "He's dead," she said coldly. "And I have debts to pay. The lifestyle he promised me. Well, let's just say he wasn't as liquid as he pretended to be. I need the cash. And I need this house empty." She tapped my pocket. "That envelope is your notice, eviction. 30 days. But honestly, I prefer you out by the weekend. The stages are coming and your gloomy presence is bad for branding." She turned to leave, then paused. "Don't fight me, Sarah. You have no money, no lawyer, and no claim. Take your little patch of woods and go." I watched her walk back into the warmth of the party, leaving me in the cold. I ripped open the envelope. It was a formal legal notice, drafted by her lawyer, giving me 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days to pack up 24 years of life. But as I stared at the paper, tears blurring my vision, I remembered something Dad had told me years ago. When he was teaching me about land surveys, "Always check the boundaries, Sarah. The devil is in the details." Linda thought she had one. She thought she was the queen of the castle. But she had forgotten that a castle is useless if you can't cross the moat. The reading of the will 3 days later was a formality, a public execution of my inheritance. We sat in a sterile conference room in downtown, the air conditioning humming too loudly. Linda sat opposite me, flanked by a man I assumed was her lawyer, a shark in a 3-piece suit named Merce Sterling. I was alone. The executor, an old friend of Dad's named Arthur, looked pained as he read the documents. He kept glancing at me with apologetic eyes. "To my wife, Linda," Arthur read, his voice monotone, "I bequeath the primary residence, known as the Oaks, including the structure and the primary residential lot, along with all fluid assets and stocks." Linda didn't even blink. She knew this. She had probably dictated it. "To my daughter, Sarah," Arthur continued, clearing his throat, "I bequeath the sum of $10,000. And the parcels of land designated as Plot B and Plot C, surrounding the primary residence." Linda let out a small, derisive snort. "The useless overgrown woods," she muttered to Sterling. "She can camp there for all I care." I sat in silence, stunningly numb. Plot B and Plot C. I knew those plots. They were the rugged, forested areas flanking the house. Dad had bought them to ensure no neighbors could ever build too close. They were steep, rocky, and filled with old-growth timber. Beautiful, but commercially worthless for development. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Arthur looked down at the papers. "Yes, Sarah, I did try to counsel him against this recent change, but he knew what was best," Linda interrupted sharply. "He knew Sarah needed to learn independence. Handing her a fortune would have ruined her." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Well, if we're done here, I have a meeting with the real estate agent. Brenda is very excited about the listing. Apparently, the market is hot for luxury tear-downs." "Tear down?" I shot up from my chair. "You're going to tear it down?" "Not me," Linda said, checking her watch. The developers who buy it will. They want to put in condos. High-end, of course. The Robert Estates. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? She gathered her purse. Remember, Sarah, you have 27 days left. But I'll need the keys to your suite by Friday for the painters. You can sleep in the guest cottage until the month is up. You're a monster, I said, the words tasting like ash. Linda leaned in, her face inches from mine. I'm a survivor, sweetie. And right now, I'm rich. You're just... irrelevant. She swept out of the room, Mr. Sterling trailing behind her like a loyal dog. Arthur sighed and slid a thick stack of documents across the table toward me. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Here are the deeds for your inheritance. Plot B and Plot C. I took the heavy folder, feeling the weight of my father's betrayal. How could he? How could he leave everything to her? I walked out of that office feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. I had $10,000 and a few acres of trees. Linda had millions in the house. If you're watching this and you've ever felt the sting of injustice, the burning heat in your chest when someone takes what isn't theirs and laughs about it, then you know exactly how I felt in that parking lot. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But instead, I just sat in my beat-up sedan and cried until my throat hurt. But then, the crying stopped. And the anger. The anger cooled into something hard. Something sharp. I wiped my face and looked at the folder on the passenger seat. Plot B and Plot C. I opened it. I started reading the survey descriptions. I read the coordinates. I read the easement clauses. And then I saw it. I stopped breathing. I read it again. Then a third time. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Linda had been so focused on the house, the jewel, the asset, the prize, that she hadn't bothered to look at the map. She hadn't checked the boundaries. She had the house, but she didn't have the way to get to it. If you want to see exactly how a greedy stepmother destroys herself, hit the subscribe button right now, because the lesson I was about to teach her was going to be expensive. The next week was a blurring nightmare of packing boxes and biting my tongue. Linda was in full swing. Trucks arrived daily. Expensive staging furniture was brought in to replace my father's beloved leather armchairs. The house was being sanitized of its soul. I was relegated to the guest cottage, a small, damp structure near the gate. It was humiliating. I would watch from the cottage window as realtors and contractors came and went, treating the property like it was already sold. Linda paraded around in white linen, pointing and directing, playing the grieving widow when it suited her and the ruthless businesswoman when it didn't. One afternoon, I was hauling a box of my childhood books to my car when I ran into Brenda, the real estate agent. She was a loud woman with hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde ambition. Sarah, she chirped. Fake sympathy dripping from her voice. So sad about your dad. But really, this is for the best. Linda has such vision. We're going to list at $4.5 million. Can you imagine? $4.5 million. I repeated, keeping my face neutral. Oh yes. The market is desperate for this kind of exclusivity. The privacy, the long dramatic driveway. It's the selling point. We're calling it the sanctuary above the cloud. The driveway is a selling point. I asked innocently. Huge. In this town? People pay for the buffer. That quarter mile of asphalt is worth its weight in gold. I nodded slowly. I bet it is. Later that day, I found Linda in the kitchen, throwing away my mother's old recipe books. The sight made my blood boil. But I forced myself to remain calm. I needed her to feel secure. I needed her to feel untouchable. Linda, I said softly. She jumped, then glared. God, you creep around like a cat. What do you want? I told you those boxes need to be out of the hallway. I know. I'm moving them. I just wanted to ask. About the land Dad left me. She laughed, tossing a cookbook into the trash. The scrubland. What about it? Going to build a treehouse? I was thinking of developing it. Maybe clearing some trees. Selling the timber. She waved a hand dismissively. Do whatever you want with your dirt, Sarah. Just don't make a mess while I have buyers viewing the house. I don't want the sound of chainsaws ruining the ambience. I'll try to keep it down, I said, lowering my eyes. So, you don't mind if I do some work on my property? I don't care if you burn it down as long as the smoke doesn't blow this way. She sneered. Just stay out of my way. The open house isn't 2 weeks. It's going to be the event of the season. I need you gone by then. I'll be gone, I promised. You won't even see me. That was the second clue. She truly didn't care. She was so focused on the cash out that she viewed me and my inheritance as nothing more than a nuisance, a fly to be swatted away. She had no idea that the dirt she despised was a noose around her neck. I went back to the cottage and called Mark, a friend from college who specialized in property law. Mark, I said, voice shaking with adrenaline. I need you to look at these deeds. Tell me if I'm crazy. Send them over, he said. An hour later, he called back, Sarah. Do you realize what this says? Tell me. The original estate was one massive lot. But your dad subdivided it 5 years ago for tax purposes. The house sits on Lot A. The surrounding woods are Lot B and C. And the driveway? I asked, holding my breath. The driveway, Mark laughed, a sound of pure disbelief, entirely traverses Lot B. The easement allowing Lot A to use the driveway expired upon the death of the original owner unless specifically renewed in the deed transfer. It wasn't, so. So? Legally? That driveway is yours. And without a renewed easement. Linda is trespassing every time she checks her mail. Can I close it? Sarah, it's your private property. You can turn it into a bowling alley if you want. But are you sure you want to do this? It's going to be war. I looked out the window at Linda, who was currently shouting at a landscaper for missing a spot of weeding. Mark, I said, I don't just want to close it. I want to obliterate it. The breaking point wasn't the eviction itself. It was what happened 3 days later. I had returned to the main house to collect the last of my things, specifically, my mother's jewelry box, which Dad had kept in his safe. It wasn't valuable in terms of diamonds, but it held her locket and her wedding ring. When I entered the study, the safe was open. And empty. Panic surged through me. I ran to the living room where Linda was sipping an espresso with Brenda. Where is it? I demanded. Where is Mom's jewelry? Linda looked up, bored. Oh, that old junk. I pawned it. The world stopped. You what? I needed to clear the safe for the new valuation, she said casually. Besides, it was tacky. The gold was tarnished. I got a few hundred for the melt value. Melt value? I screamed. My mother's wedding ring? You melted it down. Sarah, stop being dramatic. She snapped. I have bills to pay. The electric bill alone for this place is astronomical. I'm doing what I have to do to survive. She stood up and poked me in the chest. And you have no right to demand anything. You are a guest. An unwanted one. Now get out of my sight before I call security. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a bridge collapsing. The last tether of decency, of hoping she would have a shred of humanity, was gone. She hadn't just stolen the house, she had erased my mother. She had melted down the symbol of my parents' love for… What? An electricity bill? A bottle of wine? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw her for what she was, a hollow, parasitic creature. And parasites don't stop feeding until the host is dead. Unless you burn them out. My hand stopped shaking. My breathing slowed. Okay, I said. My voice was eerily calm. Linda blinked, surprised by my sudden composure. Okay? You're right. It's your house. Your rules. I'll get out of your hair. I turned and walked away. That's it. She called after me. Suspicious. That's it, I said without looking back. Good luck with the open house, Linda. I hope it's everything you deserve. I walked out the front door, down the steps, and onto the driveway in my driveway. I knelt down and touched the asphalt. It was warm from the sun. Sorry, Dad, I whispered. But I have to break a few things to fix this. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a landowner and I had a lot of renovation to do. The plan formed with terrifying clarity. I had 2 weeks until the grand open house. Linda had blitzed the media. There were ads in the local luxury magazines, targeted Facebook ads, even a drone video tour that went viral locally. She was expecting hundreds of people. She had hired a high-end catering company, a string quartet, and valets. She was leveraging everything on the sale. Mark did some digging and found out the twist I hadn't expected. Linda was broke. Truly broke. She had maxed out every credit card Dad had given her, and she had taken out high-interest personal loans against the expectation of the inheritance. If the house didn't sell fast, the sharks would come for her. She needed that $4.5 million like she needed oxygen. This made my leverage infinite. I spent the next week living a double life. By day, I was a compliant stepdaughter, moving my boxes out of the cottage, smiling at the realtors. By night, I was in a motel room with Mark, poring over municipal codes and zoning laws. We need a permit, I said, stabbing the map. If I just block the road, she can call the police and claim unlawful detainment or emergency access issues. I needed to be legal. Ironclad. Road maintenance, Mark suggested. You own the land. You have the right to maintain the grade. If you pull a permit for driveway resurfacing or drainage repair, you have the legal right to close the thoroughfare for safety reasons. Resurfacing isn't enough, I said. Cars can drive over gravel. I need it impassable. Culvert replacement, Mark said, his eyes lighting up. There's a stream that runs under the driveway near the main gate. If you get a permit to replace the culvert pipe, you have to dig a trench across the entire width of the road, a 6-foot deep trench. No one is driving over that. How fast can we get the permit? City Hall is slow, Mark warned. But my cousin works in zoning. If we pay the expedited fee, maybe a week. Do it, I said. And I need a construction crew. One that doesn't ask questions. One that takes cash. I know a guy. Mark grinned. Big Tony. He hates subdivision developers. He'll love this. We set the date. The permit was for emergency drainage repair. Start date, the Saturday of the open house. Start time, 6 a.m. I felt a thrill I had never experienced before. It was the thrill of the hunt. I was watching Linda pick out flower arrangements for her big day, completely unaware that she was arranging flowers for her own funeral. Positioning was key. I couldn't let her suspect anything. I moved fully out of the cottage 3 days early, handing over the keys to Brenda. Thank you for being so cooperative, Sarah, Brenda said, clutching the keys. I know this is hard for you. I just want Linda to be happy, I lied, my face a mask of resignation. She deserves a fresh start. She really does, Brenda nodded. She's been under so much stress with the finances. This sale will save her. I'm sure it will, I said. By the way, Brenda, just a heads up. I'm going to be doing some minor landscaping work on my plots this weekend. Just clearing some brush. Nothing noisy. Oh, that's fine, honey. As long as the driveway is clear for the limos. The driveway. I paused, tasting the words. Don't worry. I'll take care of the driveway. I drove away, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror. I checked into a cheap motel a few towns over. I spent the nights coordinating with Big Tony. He was a beast of a man with a beard like a Viking and a laugh that shook the walls. So let me get this straight, Tony said, reviewing the plans in a diner booth. You want me to dig a 10-foot wide, 6-foot deep trench right across the only entrance, yes? And drop in a concrete pipe? Eventually. But take your time with the pipe. Safety first. Tony chuckled. And this lady. She evicted you? She evicted me and melted my mother's wedding ring. Tony stopped laughing. He looked at me, dead serious. I'll bring the big excavator. We'll make it look like the Grand Canyon. Everything was set. But then, as it always does, the universe threw a curveball. The hidden depth revealed itself on Thursday. I got a call from an old family friend. Drive Evans, Dad's cardiologist. Sarah, he said, sounding hesitant. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I heard about the eviction. I thought you should know. Know what? Your father. The last month, he was trying to change the will back. What? He called me. He said Linda had pressured him. He wanted to undo the transfer of the house. He wanted to leave it in a trust for you. He was scheduled to meet with his lawyer the day after he died. I nearly dropped the phone. She knew. She had to have known. That's why she was rushing. That's why she was so cruel. She wasn't just a widow. She was a thief who ran out the clock on a dying man. The anger turned into cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. This was carrying out my father's dying wish the only way I could. Friday night. The calm before. Linda posted a video on Instagram. She was toasting with champagne in the foyer, ready for the next chapter. Tomorrow is the big day. #fresh start, #luxury living. I like the post. See you soon, I whispered to the screen. I met Tony and his crew at 4 a.m. at the diner. We had coffee black. The mood was focused. We were a small army moving out. Permits? Tony asked. Laminated and ready, I said, tapping the clipboard. Police won't like it, he warned. Police follow the law. The law says I have a valid permit for emergency repairs on my private property. If they try to stop us, they're liable for any flooding damage caused by the faulty culvert. You're a scary lady, Sarah, Tony said admiringly. I had a good teacher, I said, thinking of Linda. We rolled out. The convoy consisted of a massive yellow excavator, a dump truck full of gravel, and 2 pickup trucks. We drove through the dark, the heavy machinery rumbling like thunder. We arrived at the base of the driveway at 5:30 a.m. The sun was just starting to bleed purple into the sky. The gate to the Oaks was open. Linda had left it open for the caterers who were due at 7 a.m. Where do you want it? Tony asked. Idling the excavator, I pointed to a spot about 50 feet up the driveway. It was a choke point where the road narrowed between 2 steep embankments of rock. There was no going around. No driving through the grass. It was the only way up. Right there, I said. Cut it deep. Tony gave a thumbs up. The diesel engine roared to life. The metal bucket curled like a fist. The first crunch of asphalt was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It sounded like victory. By 6:30 a.m., the trench was a gaping wound in the luxury driveway. It was beautiful. A sheer drop, 6 feet deep, stretching from bank to bank. Tony placed orange safety barriers and roll close signs. Then came the first victim. A catering van came speeding up the road. The driver slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt inches from the barriers. He leaned out the window, confused. "Hey, what's this?" "I got a delivery for the main house." I stepped out from behind the truck, wearing a hard hat and a high-vis vest. I held up my clipboard. "Roads closed, sir. Emergency drainage repair." "Closed? For how long?" "Hard to say. Unexpected soil instability. Could be a week. Could be a month. I have $500 of shrimp back here. The lady is gonna kill me." "I'm sorry," I said. "Not sorry at all. Unless that van can fly, you're not getting up there." The driver cursed. Tried to call someone, presumably Linda. Got no answer. And eventually had to reverse all the way down the winding road, because there was no room to turn around. Then, the phone call started. My phone didn't ring, but I could imagine Linda's phone was exploding. The caterers, the florists, the valet company. At 7 a.m., a sleek black Mercedes flew up the road. It stopped at the trench. Linda got out. She wasn't wearing her morning black today. She was wearing a white power suit, but her face was red with rage. She stomped toward the barriers in her Laubaudens. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the trees. I stepped forward, adjusting my hard hat. "Safety first, Linda." She froze. She squinted at me. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" "Fixing the culvert," I said cheerfully. It was a risk of collapse. Very dangerous. Wouldn't want a potential buyer to fall into a sinkhole, would we? "Fill it in," she screamed, pointing a manicured nail at Tony. "Fill it in right now. I haven't open house in for hours." Tony leaned out of the cab, chewing a toothpick. "Can't do that, lady. Got an open permit. Liability issue. If I fill it in without the proper pipe and inspection, I lose my license." "I don't care about your license. I'll sue you. I'll sue everyone." She turned to me. "You little brat. You did this on purpose." "I'm responsible for the maintenance of my land, Linda," I said coldly. "Land you made very clear was worthless. Turns out, it's pretty essential. Move it." She lunged at me, but stopped when she saw the mud on her shoes. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll make coffee." The setback came 30 minutes later. A police cruiser rolled up, lights flashing. Linda had clearly told them some story about me trespassing or vandalizing. 2 officers stepped out. Linda ran to them, putting on her best damsel in distress act. "Officers, thank God. These hooligans have destroyed my driveway. They are blocking access to my home. Arrest them." The older officer approached me. "Ma'am, is this your equipment?" "Yes, officer," I said, handing him the permit binder. "I'm the owner of this parcel, Ploppy. As you can see, the driveway traverses my land. We identified a critical failure in the drainage system beneath the road. We had to act immediately to prevent a washout." The officer looked at the permit. He looked at the deed. He looked at the trench. "The permit looks valid." He muttered. "But it's my driveway." Linda wailed. "It leads to my house." "Actually," I interjected, "she has an implied easement for access, but that doesn't override the landowner's duty to perform emergency repairs. In fact, if I didn't fix it and someone got hurt, I'd be liable. I'm doing this for her safety." The officer scratched his head. He turned to Linda. "Ma'am, if she has a permit for repairs, it's a civil matter. We can't force her to fill in a hole on her own land." "But I have an open house." Linda screeched, losing her composure entirely. "Do you know who I am?" "Doesn't matter who you are, ma'am. It's a valid work zone." Linda turned purple. She pulled out her phone. "Get me Sterling." She screamed into it. This was the dangerous part. If Sterling could get an emergency injunction from a judge, they could force us to stop or plate over the trench. "How long?" Tony whispered to me. "Saturday," I said. "Courts are closed. Even with an emergency judge, it'll take hours to file the paperwork and get a sheriff out here to serve it. So we just have to hold the line until after the open house starts?" "Exactly." The police left, telling us to keep it civil. Linda stood on the other side of the trench, glaring at me. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "But Sterling will have a court order here by noon. And then I will take everything you have left. I will sue you for damages. I will garnish your wages for the rest of your miserable life." "Maybe," I said. "But you're going to have a hard time selling a $4.5 million house when the buyers have to hike through the woods to see it." She stormed back to her car and reversed down the hill to get cell service. I looked at Tony. "Widen it." By 11 a.m., the chaos was absolute. The open house was scheduled to start. The first prospective buyers arrived, a wealthy couple in a Bentley. They stopped at the trench, confused. I walked up to them. "So sorry about the inconvenience," I said politely. "The estate is currently inaccessible due to critical infrastructure failure. We advise turning back." "Is the house stable?" the woman asked, eyeing the muddy hole. "Hard to say," I shrugged. "Drainage issues on a hill like this could undermine the whole foundation eventually." "Shame, really." They exchanged a look of horror. The Bentley reversed faster than the catering van. Then came the stream of cars. Realtors, investors, curious neighbors. They all met the same fate: a 6-foot trench, a polite woman in a hard hat, and a very large excavator blocking the view. Brenda, the realtor, tried to hike up through the woods to guide people on foot. But the woods, my woods, were dense, thorny, and steep. I watched with grim satisfaction as Brenda, in her heels and pencil skirt, got tangled in a briar patch. She emerged looking like she had fought a bobcat, her hair ruined, her stockings shredded. "This is insane," she screamed at me from across the trench. "You are ruining me. You should have checked the survey." "Brenda," I yelled back. Professional negligence. Linda was at the bottom of the hill, frantically trying to direct traffic, but it was a bottleneck. Cars were backed up onto the main road. Horns were honking. People were angry. And the best part, the sheer embarrassment. In their social circle, appearance is everything. Having your grand estate sale turned into a construction zone disaster was social suicide. I sat on the tailgate of Tony's truck, eating a sandwich, watching the empire crumble. Around 1 p.m., a sleek black sedan forced its way through the traffic jam. A man in a suit got out. It was Sterling, the lawyer. He was waving a paper. "Injunction," he shouted, marching up the hill. "Cease and desist immediately." He slapped the paper against the barricade. "I have a judge's order. Fill this in now, or you're in contempt." I picked up the paper. My hands shook slightly. But I had prepared for this. "This order," I said, reading it, "requires us to restore reasonable access. It doesn't say we have to finish the repair instantly. It means put a plate over it." Sterling roared. "We don't have a plate rated for vehicle traffic," Tony shrugged. "Gotta order one. Takes 48 hours. Then I'll call a crew." Sterling yelled. "On my land?" I stepped forward. "You bring an unauthorized crew onto my property without my liability waiver, and I'll have them arrested for trespassing. And if their shoddy plate collapses under a buyer's car, that's on you, Sterling. Are you willing to put your malpractice insurance on the line for that?" Sterling paused. He was a shark, but sharks don't like liability traps. He looked at the trench, then at the angry mob of buyers turning around, then at Linda, who was sobbing near her car. "The open house is over," he said quietly. "The damage is done." He turned to Linda. "We're done for today. Get in the car." "No." Linda screamed. "Make her fix it." "It's over, Linda." Sterling snapped. "Look around. No one is buying this house today. We need to regroup." Linda looked up the hill at me. Her face was a mask of pure hatred. But beneath the hate, I saw a fear. She knew she had lost the day, and she knew what that meant for her loans. The fallout was swift and brutal. The open house was a total failure. 0 viewings. 0 offers. The viral video of the roadblock revenge, courtesy of a neighbor's kid, circulated locally. The reputation of the estate was tainted. It was now the problem house with the crazy legal dispute. In the world of high-stakes real estate, uncertainty is poison. No developer wanted to touch a property where the only access road was held hostage by a hostile owner. Linda tried to sue me, of course. But lawsuits take time and money to things she didn't have. With the sale stalled, her creditors pounced. The bridge loans she had taken out came due. 2 weeks later, the power to the main house was cut off. I saw the utility truck roll up to the gate. I had temporarily filled the trench with gravel for utility access. Then, Brenda dropped the listing. She didn't want the headache. Then, Sterling resigned as her counsel when her retainer check bounced. I stayed in my motel. But I visited the site every day. I watched the lights go out in the mansion. I watched the lawn turn brown as the landscaping service was cancelled. The house, once a symbol of Linda's triumph, was becoming her prison. Finally, a month later, the foreclosure notice was posted on the gate. The bank was taking possession. The reckoning happened on a Tuesday. I was at the trench, now neatly filled and repaved. As the repair was complete, inspecting the work, Linda came walking down the driveway. She wasn't driving the Mercedes the repo man had taken that last week. She was dragging 2 suitcases behind her on foot. She looked 10 years older. Her hair wasn't done. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt. She stopped when she saw me. Are you happy? She asked. Her voice was hollow. No, I said honestly. I'm not happy. My dad is dead. My mom's ring is gone. And this house is empty. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. My friends, they stopped answering my calls when the money ran out. That's how it works with people like that, I said. You bought them. Now the payment stopped. I was his wife, she said, a flash of defiance returning. You were a leaseholder, I corrected. And your lease expired. She stared at me for a long moment, waiting for me to offer help, to offer money, to be the nice girl she thought I was. Can I get a ride to the station? She asked. I looked at her suitcases. I looked at the long, empty road. Sorry, I said. Road's closed for you. She flinched as if I had slapped her. She gripped her suitcase handles, turned and began the long walk down to the main road. I watched her go until she was just a speck, then turned back to the house. The auction was held 3 months later. Bank foreclosures are ugly affairs, but this one was unique. Usually, a house like the Oaks would start a bidding war, but I had made sure every potential buyer knew the situation. I had Mark send letters to every registered bidder explaining that the driveway was private property and that I, the owner, had no intention of granting an easement to anyone other than myself. Basically, if they bought the house, they'd have to buy a helicopter to get to it. The auctioneer started the bidding at $2 million. Silence. $1.5 million. Silence. $1 million. The room was uncomfortable. People whispered. They looked at me, sitting in the front row, looking calm and resolved. Do I have any bids? The auctioneer pleaded. 500,000, I said. The auctioneer looked pained. The property is valued at over $4 million. But it has no access, I reminded him loudly. It's a landlocked parcel. 500,000. He looked around for a savior. None came. The bank just wanted it off their books. They knew about the legal nightmare. Going once, twice. The gavel slammed down. I bought my childhood home for pennies on the dollar. I bought it with the life insurance money Dad had left directly to me, the one thing Linda couldn't touch, and a small mortgage. I own the house, I own the land, and I own the driveway. I walked into the house the next day. It smelled stale, like expensive perfume turning sour. I walked through the empty rooms, the marble floors echoing my footsteps. I went to the living room and tore down the ugly modern drapes. Sunlight flooded in, hitting the dust motes dancing in the air. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee in my dad's old percolator, which I had found in a box in the garage. Linda hadn't thought it was worth selling. I sat on the floor of the empty study, looking out at the valley. Revenge is a strange thing. They say it's sweet, but it's not. It's exhausting. It's heavy. But as I looked down at the driveway, that beautiful ribbon of asphalt winding through the trees, I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I had defended the fortress. I had honored the legacy. Linda was gone, a bad memory fading like mist. But the oaks were still standing. I took a sip of coffee. Ideally, I should have felt guilty. I had ruined a woman's life. I had humiliated her, bankrupted her, and left her on the street. Did I go too far? I asked the empty room. The silence of the house felt like a warm hug. It felt like Dad. No, I whispered. I put things back where they belonged. If you've ever had to fight for what's yours, you know the peace that comes after the war. And if you haven't, well, just remember to check the deeds and subscribe. Because you never know when you might need to rent an excavator.